Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, this Friday at midnight, the government will run out of funding. That leaves us with just a few options. One, we could pass the massive, yet-to-be-drafted Pelosi-Schumer omnibus spending package, leaving the outgoing Democratic House majority in charge of drafting the bill to fund the federal government for the balance of fiscal year 2023, despite the fact that voters sent a clear message this November disapproving of the fiscal direction of our federal government. Two, we could, yet again, pass another short-term stopgap measure that just kicks the can down the road for one more week to allow more backroom negotiations to take place in secret. To be clear, this accomplishes nothing. It is simply a way to whip up support for another inflated spending package. So when I say it accomplishes nothing, that's not really true. It is very effective at doing some things. It marshals very effectively the angst of hundreds of millions of Americans who don't want a government shutdown. A lot of these people depend on the federal government remaining open to process whether it's the paychecks for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, or others who have contract with the government or receive payments from the government of one sort or another, or otherwise impacted by the federal government's inability to operate during a shutdown. They all have something to worry about. They all have reasons to fear a shutdown. And those anxieties end up being transferred onto their elected representatives in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, who in turn fear a shutdown for the same reasons and feel the collective weight of those concerns bearing down on them. But there's a dual threat that takes place here. You see, those who may be coming to the Senate floor in the next day or two to propose exactly this, option two, that is to just kick the can down the road for another week through another one-week spending measure, they'll be coming down here predictably, foreseeably, in the name of avoiding a shutdown. But make no mistake, Mr. President, when saying that they want to delay spending, they want to delay any shutdown by another week, they're not really saying we don't want the threat of a shutdown. They're saying we want to move the threat of a shutdown, the possibility of a shutdown, closer to Christmas. Why Christmas? Well, that's when the anxieties of the American people and their elected representatives in Congress are at their maximum. That's where we all feel it the most. We all feel the pressure to get something done the most. And that's also where members of Congress, being human, understandably want to be able to get home in time for Christmas, to spend the Christmas holidays with their families. And it's this dual threat that very often, year after year, is used to persuade members of Congress to vote for a spending bill that spends too much money and that does so through a mechanism that they've had no part in, that they've been excluded from, that they would never vote for in the absence of this dual threat of a shutdown at Christmas time. So no, this isn't right. When we do that to the American people, what you're really doing is cutting them out of the process. When you cut the people's elected representatives in Congress, who have been elected by the American people to take care of these things for them so that they don't have to worry about it. And then you tell them, we're not going to give those you elect any opportunity to have meaningful input into a spending bill, which we're going to present to them at Christmas time in order to force a non-existent consensus behind something they know they shouldn't vote for. That is wrong. It's gone over and over again, and it's got to stop. It must stop now. So that's option two. Suboptimal, to say the least. Option three, we could do the right thing, and we could pass a continuing resolution that keeps the government funded, maintaining current spending levels until after we've sworn in the new Congress, including the Republican House majority early next year. Mr. President, it's only this latter option, only the third option that makes any sense at all. And it's only this third option that's fair to voters. You see, Mr. President, for the last 2 years, we've seen unprecedented inflation, driven by reckless government spending. And we've seen that moving forward in a way that's crushed American families. Our national debt has grown during those 2 years by about $4 trillion, reaching an astronomical $31 trillion, a figure that we've just reached within the last few days. In Utah, inflation costs the average household $1,000 a month, every single month, relative to the day that Joe Biden took office. These are not, for the most part, people who just have an extra $1,000 to burn. Nor is the extra $1,000 a month going toward luxury items. No, it's just groceries, housing, gasoline, healthcare, the basic things that the American people need in order to live. Simply put, the American people can't afford the policies of the last few years. They certainly can't afford the kinds of spending bills that get passed when we use this dual threat of the shutdown threatened at Christmas time under an artificially imposed deadline. Unsurprisingly, American voters cast their votes, and in so doing, signaled that they want the government to go in a new direction. After listening to an exhaustive list of excuses from the Biden administration, blaming inflation on everything from the pandemic to Putin, the American people saw through the smoke and mirrors. They voted for accountability and made it clear that they expect their elected representatives to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Unfortunately, if this body just goes right ahead and passes another omnibus spending bill, a bill that we know is coming, a bill that we know is going to be thousands of pages long, a bill that we know that we will receive at the most maybe a day or two before we're expected to vote on it, with no intervening committee debate or discussion, or opportunity for amendment. This body, if it chooses to enact such legislation, will be ignoring those legitimate desires on the part of the voters. We're witnessing a conspicuous, reoccurring trend whereby leaders use the threat of a government shutdown to pressure members into voting for inflated spending provisions without even time to read the bill, much less without giving them any time to consult with those they represent about how they feel about that spending and those policies. So does this tactic remind you of anything? Well, it should. How about Speaker Pelosi's now infamous statement about Obamacare, when she said, we have to pass the bill in order to find out what's in it? We all know how that turned out. Not well. Like Obamacare, the resulting omnibus legislation that results from that kind of attitude, that kind of dismissive approach, dismissive not just of individual members, but of those they represent, always contains ideologically driven provisions utterly unrelated to the budget, many of which could never pass if they had to withstand the light of day, if they had to be voted on their own merits. We cannot, we must not, we should never use the threat of a government shutdown to force through policy changes that could never survive a vote on their own merits. Well, I believe we should pass, we must pass a clean, continuing resolution, one that will take us into the next Congress. Failure to do so will lock the remainder of this fiscal year into a pattern in which liberal policies and an inflationary spending agenda crammed through by unaccountable members of Congress, many of whom have just lost re-election or didn't seek it. All those things will descend upon the American people in a most unfavorable and unwelcomed way. We can't let that happen. I don't want to be any part of that. I don't think most of our colleagues on either side of the aisle do. Not only would it be poor form and unwise and inconsiderate and really unkind for Congress to pass a massive spending bill, but it would also be without precedent in modern U.S. history You know, Mr. President, since 1954, the party in control of the House of Representatives has shifted from one party to another a total of just 5 times since 1954. In exactly 0 of those instances did Congress go back after that election and during a lame duck session enact sweeping comprehensive spending legislation. Not one instance since 1954 has that happened. Not once has there been an instance where Congress did that before a newly elected House majority could be sworn in. We can pass a continuing resolution that doesn't include any of the new partisan agenda items that either side has proposed. It would keep the government running until the new Congress can develop a full-year discretionary budget, one that's agreeable to both sides, or at least has been adequately vetted on both sides, and with our constituents, with input from members of both political parties in both chambers of Congress. I urge my colleagues to support the passage of this short-term continuing resolution that maintains current spending levels until the new Congress takes office. Doing so will ensure that we listen to the people's voices and that the incoming House majority has the opportunity to make the spending decisions that are in the best interests of the American people. We owe them nothing less. To that end, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-5244, which is at the desk. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?